All right, good evening. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Rick Detweiler. We're going to call the wrestling working group to order. Senator Ford presiding over. My name is Rick Detweiler, Assistant Vice President for Government and Community Relations here at the University. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to, again, focus here with the working group. Thank you all for attending tonight. You have an agenda placed in front of you. Tonight, the focus of attention will be on Dr. Matt Robinson, who's going to share a preview of the feasibility study that we had when we were last together charged the sports management group to pull together. I think it sounds like he's done some significant work there. He's going to offer a preliminary preview of what that looks like. He's going to entertain questions, input for ideas for additional variables and information for him to consider as we move forward. And with that, actually, I'll turn it over to Senator Ford if you wanted to offer a comment or make a few words before Matt gets started.
Sure, thank you. Matt, let me make sure that I thank you very much for taking the time to do the feasibility study. I think that this is a conversation that has taken place year after year since the program was dropped back in 1991. To the folks that are sitting around the table, thank you for all the input that you've given to the general public who has not only joined us tonight, but also has given their input to this process in making sure that we have some open communications with the University of Delaware, and hopefully this leads us on a good journey together.
And Matt, before you get started, I think it's important to mention we received word late this afternoon that our athletic director, Chrissy Graywa, is not going to be able to do it. She was disappointed. She understands how important this issue is for many, but there's something has her attention, and she's gone away and couldn't make it back in time to participate in the session. So I thought it was important to know that while this is an important issue for her and the university, there's something that captured her and wouldn't allow her to make it back in time to participate. So I thought I would share.
Ricky, before we get started, can we actually get everybody to do an introduction? That would be great.
Sure. Rick Detweiler, University.
Keith Neff, Mount Pleasant Athletic Coach.
Mark Lloyd Whitman, high school wrestling coach.
Eric Buxton, Polytech High School wrestling coach.
Aaron Harris, Delaware High School athletic director and wrestling coach.
Art Jenkins, Office of the Controller General.
Nicole Poor, State Senator for the 12th District.
Bernice Whaley, Director of Delaware Economic Development Office.
Paul Bomback, State Representative, the Newark area.
Jack Holloway, Athletic Director, Tar Hill School, former Executive Director of Scholastic Division of NWCA.
Nick Leonard, Ad Pond High School, founder of East to East and the Gal Wrestling Alliance.
Mike Moyer, Executive Director of the National Wrestling Coaches Association.
Great. And Matt Robinson, Professor at the University of Delaware, Sport Management. Well, first of all, thank you for everybody coming tonight. The purpose of my presentation tonight really is to present an overview of the variables that the university would consider in the plan of reinstating a Division I wrestling program here at the university. So in going through that, what you have in front of you is number one is the PowerPoint slides that I'll go through. I have some support articles and information there that are for you that you can review as we go through or after the presentation's done. And then again, the outline really just kind of talking about the history behind the UD's program of wrestling prior to being dropped. Taking a look at some case studies of the dropping and adding of programs that have occurred recently and on a national level. The variables that are under consideration for the university in taking a look at making this type of decision. And then really taking a look at what University of Delaware wrestling would look like reinstated and the realities of it and the impact on the university and the athletic department as well. And then just taking a look at trends in sport and wrestling as well as the Olympic movement nationally, and again, where that all fits. And then another thing that came up in the last meeting is just sort of taking a look at, I know the primary focus is looking at Delaware, but also looking at some of the other options as far as the universities and colleges within the state and what potentials are there as well. So first of all, in the meeting that we had last time, we talked about the history of UD's wrestling and the situation around it being let go. Had the opportunity to speak with the administrators that were involved with it, and some of the information that came up is, what was shared with me was the final 10 years dating back from 81 to 91 in terms of the performance of the program. When you take a look at the variables associated with dropping it, the one thing was talking about the decline in performance as well as participation numbers. Looking at it from over the course of those 10 years, the one thing that was brought up in the last several years of the program, although that number that was presented there was the roster number at the start of the season, that number declined as the season went. To the point that in the last year there were 2 matches that the team didn't have enough wrestlers to put forth as far as the match was concerned. With that also, the individual that was the coach of the program at the time, the structure of the athletic department was they were a part of the physical education department. So the head coach of the wrestling program was actually a physical education instructor. And so he had an interest of giving up that responsibility of coaching. So it was more along the lines of a faculty member giving up a course more than viewing it as a coach that oversaw an entire program. And so at that point, the decline in the program going along with, there were pressures in terms of budgetary cuts, and all different options were considered, and then looking at dropping the wrestling program was one of the options that was considered with that. Now, along with that, there were a lot of talk in terms of Title IX, that the feedback that I received from the administration was that it wasn't the reason, Title IX wasn't the reason for the dropping, but rather Title IX did, and gender equity did benefit from the program being dropped. And the one thing that I shared with you is, I'll go back to it, something that's a support document for you there is, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, but if you take a look at the success of the athletic department at the time, from 1981 through 1989, we were in the East Coast Conference, we had success across multiple sports, and wrestling was, you could say, was lagging behind there in that performance related to the other programs. But the other document that I wanted to share with you was, at that point, nationally, Title IX was legislation that was passed in the 1970s. But there was a variety of legislation that was passed through the 1970s and to the 1980s that was challenging Title IX, trying to take away the teeth, I guess you could say. But there were several significant cases that were settled in the late 80s that pretty much made a statement Title IX wasn't going away. And you could say at that point, it became a reality for a lot of athletic departments that they were going to have to address Title IX and start moving towards meeting the requirements as far as Title IX was concerned. 2 of them that are mentioned in the handout that I gave you, I would say, was the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1988 that brought back that a decision in 1984 said that if an athletic department didn't receive funds, they did not have to follow Title IX. But the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1988 said that that was overturned. And another significant one, and we'll make reference to it later, in 1992, was that when we talk about Title IX, it's if a claim is made for Title IX violation, you could have your federal funds taken away from you. But in 1992, there was a significant case that determined that an individual who felt that they were violated by a Title IX violation could seek compensatory damages. So meaning that an individual could sue an institution if they felt their Title IX rights were violated. So those number of cases led to, in the sense that, hey, Title IX was not going to go away. So in that case there, if you take a look at the University of Delaware, that women's sport was introduced to the University of Delaware in 1971, and you saw that there was a continued growth. Soccer was added the year before wrestling was dropped. And at that point, soccer was becoming a mainstream sport and also becoming very popular on the female side of things. So I think there was some thought that wrestling was dropped in favor of gender equity, and as we said, gender equity at that point was not going to go away, and athletic departments were going to have to be sure to become compliant with those. Now, the case studies as far as dropping and adding, I've shared a couple articles with you that when we talk in terms of dropping, Boston University and Delaware State were both universities that had dropped wrestling. Boston University, if you read the article, talks in terms of a situation where they were joining the Patriot League, and again, budgetary constraints. They were saying that the conference they were joining did not have wrestling, and then again, taking a look at the budgetary constraints on their athletic department. In the case of DSU dropping it, and this was several years back, In the case of Delaware State, the claims were related to academic performance as well as budgetary. A little bit later on, I'll take a look at Delaware State as far as their standing as far as Title IX is concerned. But again, it was the case of, and their concern was the academic side and then also the budgetary side. Now, talking about reinstating the programs, in recent years you had Bucknell University and Fresno State University. In the case of Bucknell, it was the case that the program had been dropped, and it was primarily directed for one of the reasons was Title IX. The reinstatement of the program was around a major donor stepping forward, who not only funded the wrestling program, but also was involved with funding Title IX initiatives and ultimately capital improvements. And so it was not just the reinstatement of wrestling. Wrestling was a part of an overall gift that benefited the entire athletic department. In the case of Fresno State, it was an interest in the sport that primarily brought that back. And again, they did receive donations, but still the athletic department and university was going to take on the interest as far as the cost of the general operating expenses for that program. And again, Fresno State had a strong tradition in that program, but again, when their decision to drop had to do with monetary and Title IX concerns. Now, wrestling at UD, items to consider. And these are the types of things that when you sit there and say, I cannot speak on behalf of the athletic director, but just doing an assessment of the environment that we're currently in, these are the things that you would need to consider about. That right now the university is in a time of transition. You have a new leadership that really just took place, president coming on that started in the fall semester. You have a new athletic director that was hired this summer. And again, we're in a time of transition. So I think when you talk about adding a sport, the first thing I think we need to look at, does it fit with the alignment as far as the vision that's been communicated by our new president, Dennis Asanis, and then also aligning that with an athletic vision. And then the other thing is that the idea that conference alignment and Delaware, if a school like Delaware was looking to align itself in a different conference, what the ramifications would be adding a sport like wrestling. Next, we'll talk in terms of Title IX, and again, the implications for Title IX, and then what the impact would be on the athletic department across these different variables of the addition of that of a new sport. So, the five pillars that President Asanis has communicated: enhancing student success, an inclusive, excellent environment, investing in intellectual and physical capital, the interdisciplinary and global programs, and fostering a spirit of innovative and entrepreneurship. And looking at those strategic principles, there is potential alignment on the first two, and potentially on the fourth. And what are we talking about? And also, this is the shared vision for UD Athletics. In speaking with our athletic director in terms of a strategic plan, they again, based upon her recent hiring, she hasn't sat down, and they as a department, they have not developed that strategic plan. But one thing that was shared was the vision that they have. And again, when you look at that, it's graduating inspired, conscientious, lifetime engaged Blue Hens, leadership skills, impacting the community. And again, it would be the idea that a wrestling program would buy in to trying to carry out this vision for UD Athletics. But actual strategic vision and strategic plan has not been put forth yet by the athletic department. And again, that goes back to the fact that you're in a period of transition right now. Now, going back for the idea of excellence, currently there's 347 Division I programs. There are only 79 wrestling programs. So there is an opportunity for excellence based upon you have 80 All-American opportunities and potential for approximately 30 national qualifiers on an annual basis. When you consider that against that, there's 347 men's basketball teams, 325 women's soccer. Again, the likelihood of having an All-American, having national qualifiers is a greater chance with a wrestling program. It's also interesting if you take a look at where University of Delaware competes in football. There's only 125 schools competing at that level. And not to make any light of their national championship just run by our women's field hockey team, but there's only 79 field hockey teams competing nationally. With 15 men's gymnastics programs, a real good chance to compete nationally. But this idea that there's certain sports that don't have as many institutions, competing in them, and that enhances the opportunity and the potential for having that to achieving national excellence. As far as inclusion is concerned, and I believe someone just shared when we talk about diverse, that again, if you take a look, and Mike Moyer had shared this information with us, taking a look at the potential for diversity, and I'll bring this up later when we start talking about the impact on the wrestling program at Delaware. But again, you take a look at that, the opportunities as far as African Americans, Hispanics, and again, they fare well in terms of number of sports and as far as representation in those sports at the intercollegiate level. Now, in terms of thinking strategically for the university, the new administration under President Asanas has identified peer institutions, and these are the schools or institutions that the university aspires to be like, and that's not just across athletics, but across the entire university, and remembering that the athletic department is a part of an overall university. So the peer institutions that have been identified, and again, this is not thinking athletics, but just overall university. Those are the schools. Next to them, I have their U.S. News World Ranking, and again, these are all research institutions. And there's the list of schools that have wrestling, and that are on the list of peer institutions that have been identified by the new administration. Now, taking a look at that, and Mike and I were just talking stats here. We're going to hear some stats, Mike. But again, taking a look at this, the University of Delaware, your Z statistic over on the side, is based upon our number in these different areas, comparing it to the mean of those institutions, basically saying that we really don't look like those institutions. We're at least 1 and sometimes 2 standard deviations away from the mean. And again, some of the ones that are interesting to look at, number one, if you take a look at the operating budgets, the athletic related student aid is comparable. But when you talk about recruiting expenses, the operating expenses overall, again, we are very diverse. Now, the number that really stands out is if you take a look at the University of Delaware, a challenge for us when you talk gender equity, if our male enrollment to our female enrollment, we have 58% females and 42% males. When you look at our peer institutions, the male enrollment is at 51%. So we're significantly, again, at least almost 2 standard deviations away from the average. And the one thing that has been pointed out to me in talking on the academic side is that the more elite academic institutions have a higher male population. And so again, as we aspire to be these institutions, or aspire towards those institutions, again, our male enrollment is lower in that case. And again, that'll come up when we begin talking about Title IX compliance and moving towards the proportionality prong of Title IX. Okay? And again, on proportionality side of things, we currently are moving towards there as far as the number of male athletes in proportion to female athletes, trying to meet that prong. Now, the other thing you want to take a look at, if you took a look at that list, the majority of the schools on that list, or actually all of the schools on that list, are what are in the Power 5 conferences. The only ones that aren't, that I did not get data as far as these are the revenues that are brought in by those departments, that University of Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech, and Case Western also, are private schools. They didn't have to reveal the detailed numbers as far as their finances are concerned. But the concern here is if you take a look at University of Delaware, the tables or the columns there, the conference that they're associated with, the revenues that they bring in, their expenses, and the subsidy is what the university provides to the athletic department. So right now, the University of Delaware provides 79% of the operating revenues for the University of Delaware Athletic Department. If you take a look at this list, outside of Rutgers University, the majority are in single digits as far as what the university is contributing to their athletic department. So again, at the larger Division I universities, they are financially self-sufficient. And the athletic department is basically saying, if you want to spend it, you got to make it. And at an institution like the University of Delaware, that is not the case. Now, of those peer institutions, these are the schools that don't have wrestling. Now, again, the schools that have highlighted in red are those that aren't in a NCAA division or what they call the football bowl classification. Now, in the case of University of Massachusetts, they are in there, and in University of Connecticut, but they are not in Power 5 conferences. And again, for those that aren't familiar with the Power 5, you have, number one, large football attendance, you have large TV contracts, you have revenue sharing associated with bowl games, as well as the NCAA basketball tournament. So they have a greater ability to generate revenues for their athletic departments than others. Okay? And then again, taking a look at that, it's kind of interesting. I did break it out, but even though we still look different, but if you broke it down just to Stony Brook and Boston University, we look a lot like them, and I'll show you that in a second. As opposed to still those Power 5 conferences, we're very different then. And again, taking a look at that, the same situation that maybe a little bit lower as far as the standard deviation, the differences as far as our athletic, what we look like compared to those institutions athletically. Now, and again, taking a look at the revenues, as I mentioned there too, if you mentioned Boston University did not have to report their numbers, but Stony Brook was, and University of Massachusetts Amherst, similar to us, that they have a significant amount of institutional support for their athletic department. Now, Mike brought up in the last meeting, if Delaware would initiate or reinstate a wrestling program, the likely conference that it would join would be the Eastern Intercollegiate Wrestling Association. These are the schools that currently make up that conference. And again, looking at that in the U.S. News and World's reporting, now the rankings are different here. You have some schools that aren't research institutions, but at the end of the day, it's not a real bad neighborhood to be hanging out as far as an athletic conference is concerned. You have several Ivy League schools in there. You have 2 of the military academies in there. And then you have some Patriot League schools in there. And Franklin Marshall is a highly selective Division III school that offers Division I wrestling. And again, when you take a look at that, our 2 CAA members that the conference, I'll talk conference alignment here in a second, the current conference the University of Delaware is in for the majority of its sports plus football, and there's football-only members to the CAA, but the core group of schools, only Drexel and Hofstra offer wrestling. So we don't have a wrestling conference in the CAA, so this would be the likely conference, and we have 2 of our conference members there. Now again, when we compare ourselves to these members, we look a little bit more like them. But again, it's the male enrollment, female enrollment that we differ almost a 1 degree, standard deviation away. But again, we look more like them. Now, the one thing that I brought up in regards to thinking strategically. Now, this is a conversation that's gone on for probably the past 5 or 6 years. This idea for a number of institutions around the country. Where do they belong? I'd like to say when I'm asked about it, that I think your Power 5 conferences have it figured out, and if you got invited to the dance card there, you're doing okay. I think the Patriot League and the Ivy League, they've got it figured out, and there's a lot of schools in the middle that are trying to figure it out and what it all means. So you could say right now we are in the CAA. It has a mix of schools ranging up from New England down to North Carolina. As I mentioned, only 2 schools have wrestling in that conference, and few of the schools, I believe 4 schools, have football in that conference. Or I'm sorry, 5 schools. Another conference that often is mentioned is the Patriot League Conference. And again, you have several schools that have wrestling in there, but the Patriot League itself does not offer it. And again, the schools that are in the Patriot League are in the EIWA. And then the other conference, the American Athletic Conference, that is made up of primarily Division I-A football schools. Now again, the conversation for Delaware, I think everybody in the room, if you follow Delaware athletics, it's been all over the map. Ranging from, some view it as a drop down going to the Patriot League, some viewing say, hey, let's go up. And a conversation often is, what's the cost of going up? But in having the conversation about bringing wrestling on, the question becomes, does it make us more attractive or less attractive having that program? And when I say less attractive, for example, if you take a look at the CAA, it's a conference that currently right now only gets 1 basketball bid. and it's a conference that has aspirations to have 2 basketball bids. What's the benefit of having 2 teams that make it to the NCAA basketball tournament? Significant financial gain for the institutions in that conference. So a mindset is that every dime you're not spending on trying to get into that basketball tournament is a dime being wasted. Now, I'm not saying that's the CAA's mindset, but the idea being there has to be a commitment made to try to get 2 teams into a basketball tournament. So again, at the end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum being, is there conferences or schools that are interested in having wrestling or currently do have wrestling, and it makes us more attractive? So I think when you thought sitting there thinking strategically, you have a comparison institutions, but also if a school like Delaware is interested in making any kind of move as far as conference alignment is concerned, then that's something that would need to be considered. Now, what would a reinstated UD wrestling program look like? Based upon the annual operating budgets for the EIWA, and that was gained from the EADA report, the average budget, which includes equipment, travel, officials, recruitment, and general expenses, is about $115,000. Now, in terms of salaries and benefits, in looking at some averages and liking to try to pay well here, a head coach plus 2 full-time assistants plus the benefits, you're looking at $230,000, or approximately $31,000. If you did a full allotment that's allowed by the NCAA as far as scholarships are concerned, and not all schools give the full allotments, but if you want the full end of the spectrum, you'd be looking at 9.9 scholarships at an out-of-state tuition of $44,000, so it's $436,000. So you're looking at a total budget for a wrestling program being at $783,000. I would say that's probably on the high end of what the expenses would be. Okay? You would have a roster of, and again, this is based upon the average number of EIAA schools, number of wrestlers you would have. Be looking at 28 wrestlers, so your operating budget would be about $4,000. The CPA on an operating budget is cost per athlete, so you'd be looking at about $4,000, but the entire budget would be at $27,000. Based upon the average number of matches in the EIWA, it looks like 19 matches, that you had 6 home, 7 away, and 6 at neutral sites. So it would be 6 home matches here at the University of Delaware. And taking a look at, and I'll jump ahead a slide just to show you, but talking about home attendance, the ones that are highlighted are in the IWA, but what you have there is the average attendance, the total attendance, their high attendance, and who that high attendance meet was against, or match was against. So looking at a Delaware wrestling program, we're probably looking at an average attendance in the in the hundreds to 1,000 a match. Again, just in that comparison there. Now going back to that is, well, actually I'll talk about that later as far as thing. In terms of the number of wrestlers that would come from Delaware, take a look at the current athletic department. There's about 20% of our athletes at the University of Delaware come from the state of Delaware. So at that number being at 28, you're looking being about 5 wrestlers from the state of Delaware would potentially be on the University of Delaware wrestling team. And then again, if you take a look at minority representation, and going back to the numbers that Mike shared, then we're looking about probably having about 4 minorities that would make up that wrestling program, be members of the wrestling team. Again, that's projecting out based upon averages. Okay. Now, when you talk about the impact of the reinstated program, you were talking about the budget for that program, but then that budget has, or that program has ramifications across the entire athletic department, ranging from the requirements as far as sports information, marketing and promotions, the increase as far as training room, strength and conditioning staff, more athletes being there, ticket operations, that if you would be ticketing the events, and I'll talk about that in a second, in terms of the choice of where the event would be held, conference dues, overall, again, basically the overall wear and tear on the overall department and its facilities. Then again, with the reinstatement of the program. So again, bringing in 28 athletes and everything that goes along with that, that trickles and has a ripple effect through the entire athletic department and all the other support services that would be associated with that program being offered. Now, when we start talking about Title IX, now I shared some information in the packet of information. Kind of it's interesting when you talk to different people about Title IX and what it all means. And so I shared some information with you there. But again, when you start talking about Title IX, there's 3 prongs of compliance, and you must meet one of them. The first one is the participation one, and again, as I mentioned, that the participation opportunities should be proportionate to the male-female proportionality as far as the campus is concerned. The second being demonstrating a history of continuing process to including women's programs. So again, Delaware, as I shared with you earlier, had added women's sports, and in more recent years added women's golf as well as women's rowing, and also has done a number of upgrades across the athletic department, enhancing the experience for our female student athletes, enhanced locker rooms, the movement of several women's teams into new offices. So again, Delaware has taken strides for that expansion and offering it, and then meeting the needs and interests and abilities of the underrepresented gender, meaning that if a request is being made by women to offer a sport, that need has been met. Okay. Now, the enforcement of Title IX. The first stop as far as Title IX enforcement is concerned, that each campus has a Title IX enforcement officer. In the case of the University of Delaware, it's Dr. Sue Groff. Also, you have the Office of Civil Rights, and again, a violation on Title IX can be reported to the office, and then it gets investigated. To this date, no one has given up federal funds for Title IX violations. Okay? But as I mentioned before, though, there have been lawsuits brought in the case of Title IX. And again, the Franklin versus Gwinnett County Public Schools was significant in the case that compensatory damages can be awarded, meaning a student athlete could sue an institution and be compensated for the violation on Title IX. Okay? And when we start talking about equity, it's not just about participation, it's also supposed to be equity in all these items being offered across the scope of the athletic department. So when we talk in terms of Title IX, as I mentioned before, and I know Jen Judy's here from the athletic department, that a Title IX study was constituted back in the spring. A group was brought together, a consultant was brought in, and those findings should be prepared for the spring semester as far as where the standing is of the University of Delaware and its athletic program. But referring back to the state of Delaware athletics and our comparison to the schools, currently, again, we have a high proportionality on the women's side, and because of that, we have been challenged on the men's side as far as the program offerings that we have to try to keep that proportionality intact. And again, when you start talking about some of the schools, when you go back to, it was kind of interesting talking to some of the athletic directors at schools that have Division I wrestling. Again, they hang their hat on their proportionality because in some cases, if you saw those numbers, you have schools that 50, 55, in one case I think 60% male proportionality. And so it's again, it's easier for them to meet that Title IX requirement and to have the multiple sports. And the other thing you take a look at Title IX in proportionality, that if you take a look at the composition of athletic departments, again, we have football, we have baseball, we have men's soccer, so 3 sports that have high roster numbers as far as males are concerned. And again, there's been significant capital investments made for those programs at Delaware, and they have long traditions as far as success. And in the case of men's soccer, very very strong success in recent years. So again, a variable that's considered. Now on the academic side, now these are the average APR sports for men's. The APR basically is an academic standing that's been established by the NCAA. It has ramifications on athletic departments in terms of, and again, when you go back to Delaware State, I think part of their decision based upon their dropping of the program had to do with their APR scores. An APR, I sat as athletic director for 4 months, and I still don't think I'm well versed to explain exactly how that number comes to be. But basically what it amounts to is that you're responsible for when a student athlete comes in, for their time there, and the status of that student athlete when they leave your institution. If they leave early and poor academic standing, you're harmed by it. If they stay and continue and fulfill their athletic eligibility but do not graduate, you're penalized. And the ideal situation is that you have student athletes staying, graduating, and graduating in good standing from the institution. So if you take a look at the national average, and I'm sorry it's a little small, but you basically have wrestling is down towards the bottom And I'm sorry, I think I had football cut off there, but it's one of the 4 bottom sports in terms of APRs are concerned. And I do apologize, when I cut that over, I was looking at football.
Yeah, if I could just add something to that, the way the APR works is it only addresses scholarship athletes. So like we've had situations, and one situation in particular, where a school had 2 scholarships. So it had 2 athletes, 2 wrestlers. The coach was giving 2 wrestlers a full scholarship. So they may have had 35 wrestlers on the team. And so if one of those 2 wrestlers doesn't make it through, it's 50% of their program flunked out. When in fact it was just one of the 2 scholarship wrestlers struggled, and the other 38 wrestlers could have had a 4.0 average. That's not the case. But the point is, one of the things that's misleading about the APR is the fact that it was really designed around football and basketball. And a sport like wrestling, particularly some of our more underfunded programs, are really at a disadvantage by the way that gets interpreted. But just for the record.
Excuse me. Who's the chair of this meeting tonight? May I ask? I'm asking to have an opportunity to speak momentarily. So who would I ask? Mr. Robinson?
I was making a presentation.
I would read that instead of 4, that would be me.
So you can, so what we're gonna do is if Matt can get through his presentation, then we're gonna open it up for conversation for the group.
My concern is an avalanche of information. Typically, when I attend a meeting such as this, especially one as important as this, I would have an opportunity to review the information in advance of the meeting so that I could listen, gain some more understanding of it, and then be useful in the discussion. I'm at a loss for what exactly I'm supposed to do here because what you're presenting sure is impressive. You're a smart guy. You reviewed this tonight, correct? You probably reviewed this a few times. You're beginning to speak a lot of French. So my concern is, at the end of this, what am I supposed to do? Try to digest this and then begin to ask questions? Is that the expectation? Based on this, or am I supposed to just say I love wrestling?
So as we described in our primary meeting, and if you would find, if I can even respond to the question, as I recall, that we would offer a preliminary review of the presentation or of the findings of the feasibility study to allow us to absorb it, get questions, understand what are some additional issues that we might have, ask the presenter, and if we need to, as a member of the working group, we can even send those things electronically so that in January, when we come back together, we've been able to provide additional questions, update information if there are other variables that we would encourage the feasibility study to pursue to help better understand this issue. So tonight is not by any means to get us to an answer. Tonight is to take a look at the direction of the report, the feasibility study, to kind of give us a chance to look under the hood of it and to see if there are other variables that we'd like Dr. Robinson to take a look at as he packages the feasibility study that we charged him with in late October. That's my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, and we'll come back again in January with that additional input so that he can provide a complete or comprehensive feasibility study to address the question that we asked him earlier.
So Eric, to break this down in layman's terms, you're talking in terms of looking right now at the variables that, again, that wrestling being brought back, some things that need to be considered. And right here is there a concern about academics? Because again, when you start talking about academics in the NCAA, okay, is it going to be added pressure or added resources directed towards academic support services?
Now, just, am I
And then there'll be a
expected
couple-
to challenge a few of these things? Am I expected to try and
Well,
defend our position, or just simply, and I think what it appears is that we're going to have another meeting. Is that right? Based on the information we're getting tonight, we'll most likely have another meeting to discuss what we're getting tonight. If that's the case, that's fine.
Yeah, I think,
All
Eric,
right.
this conversation has been going on since 1991, right? Sitting around in people's private kitchen tables, in wrestling rooms throughout the state of Delaware. And so it's taken us many years to actually get to this point. So it's not going to be a one and done conversation. And we'll continue having this conversation until we get to, some type of collaborative agreement.
Yeah, I'm good, man. I just was curious at the end, but we're good. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, did that help?
It sure did. Thank you for your time.
And then again, just here is that you have the comparison that this would be the men's sports programs in Delaware. And again, that score is just that, is a record of saying that the students and those programs, those athletes moving towards successful completion of their academic requirements. And so again, the APR, the thing about the APR are there's punishments associated with it, and then also there's negative connotations associated to an institution that does not meet the APR and receives those punishments. So again, academics, you know, the reality is in college athletics, it's there. And so the understanding that bringing on 28 new athletes is going to be and again, more resources are going to have to be directed from the athlete services area for those athletes. In terms of sports medicine, and again, you guys wrestle, you know that when you take a look at it, it's a contact sport. And so again, it would be the adding of what I just did here is taking a look at the sports that would be winter sports. I have the winter sports listed there that currently exist, and the addition of what you have there, competition and practice injuries, and then the number of average athlete exposures, and then the injury rate per 1,000 exposures. So men's wrestling has a high score. It would be the highest number as far as the winter sports would be concerned, and it's higher than football, but again, that is an injury rate per 1,000. So actually there's more injuries in football, but again, it's the idea that on sports medicine, it would have an impact on the sport medicine staff here at the University of Delaware, based upon it being a contact sport. And then also, again, with the societal concerns right now in terms of concussions, and again, a sport like contact sport with wrestling has a high rate of concussion. So again, there would be an added burden placed on the sports medicine staff related to the sport being hosted. Okay. Now, facilities. That again, when you take a look at the facilities, and again, this would be the athletic department's decision of how they'd want to address it. But basically, you have 3 primary athletic facilities. In the previous lifetime, the wrestling program was housed in the balcony of the field house. The matches were held in the field house. The first thought being of a competition area, it could be the Bob Carpenter Center. And right now, when you take a look at the Bob Carpenter Center, it's used for basketball and men's and women's basketball, a variety of outside events that bring in external revenue for the university, as well as the 87ers, the D-League team that's a tenant in the building. So again, if you used it, the Bob Carpenter Center, again, it would be up to the athletic department whether or not they charge for wrestling. And again, having an average attendance of about 1,000 doesn't make sense there. Or would it make sense doing it up in the Carpenter Sports Center, where you had previously you had the volleyball team play in the first arena, and again, the seating there would probably accommodate wrestling, but then again, it would be a burden on the would take away recreational time. But again, there are potential facilities here for wrestling, and it would be up to the athletic department to determine, based upon interest, where they wanted to have. I think the more pressing issue would be the practice area. The area that was for wrestling is now used by rowing. And again, that would have to be left to the athletic department to determine the best space that would be the practice area as far as the program would be concerned. And again, if you talked about having it different locations, then we're starting to talk about a cost associated with transferring mats from practice area to competition area. But there are facilities here, but it would just have to be worked out what would be the best facility based upon the crowd side, convenience for spectators, and so forth. Okay? Now, often it comes up, and again, Mike and I talking prior to the meeting, a lot of great ideas out there, but where does the funding come from? That the one topic was brought up is the potential for alumni giving. And communicating with athletics, there's been 338 individuals coded as wrestling in the system. 192 of them have made at least one gift to the university. 66 have made one in the last 3 years. 50 have a lifetime giving over 1,000, and 18 have a lifetime giving of over 5,000. Now the question is there, with the program being dropped in 1991, how many of potential donors have been disenfranchised by a point of attachment for them to donate to the school? Now again, viewing myself as a role that I'm not doing this as aligned with the University of Delaware as a consultant, did I want to be calling up past wrestlers and donors and seeing their likelihood to give? I think that would be something the athletic department should be doing as opposed to this project. So again, the reality is you have people that are out there that have been designated as wrestlers, and again, part of a university interest as far as trying to engage potential donors. That could be something they would ask. Now, we often hear about the concept of an endowment. Right now, there are no programs at the university that are endowed. And so I know that the one, when the wrestling program was dropped back in 1991, a number was given to say, well, if you want to bring wrestling back, it would be this number. It doesn't seem fair to say if you have to bring wrestling back, you have to hit one of these numbers as far as an endowment. So if you're looking at that number we put up there as $750,000, and that's a fully funded, all the bells and whistles program, you're looking at over a $10 million endowment that would cover the operating expenses on an annual basis. Now again, that seems unfair that no other programs are put in that situation to do that to wrestling. But if you broke it down and start taking a look at the potential of donors that could step up and fund aspects of it, whether it be the coaching staff's salaries, the scholarships, or the operating budget, and again, that would be a matter of a fundraising initiative that would help cover those expenses. Okay. Now, wrestling trends nationally. First one is, it's kind of interesting, a study that was done by the Sport and Fitness Industry Association. There's a national trend in decline in sports participation, and wrestling also seeing a decline in that participation. What's interesting with that number is part of that it can be attributed to the economic decline recession that occurred in mid-2000s that you saw at that point, and these are numbers starting about youths moving up through. That part of that decline can be attributed to the fact that people were either putting off starting families or having less children. And so those decline in participation numbers, if you take a look at it, wrestling has seen a decline in its numbers, but a lot of sports have as well. The one sport that has seen an increase has been ice hockey. And ice hockey has been very aggressive in its marketing at the grassroots level and doing a number of programs, and I think that's been part of the reason that's been attributed to their growth in their sports. So again, there has been a decline in sports participation, and I know that, but again, when you start talking about scholastic men's programs and college opportunities, again, it's been brought up when you start talking about where Delaware is located. Yes, we are a smaller state. We do not have a college program offering to our high school wrestlers, but again, we happen to sit in an area that has strong wrestling participation at the high school level, primarily Pennsylvania and New Jersey being two primary. They also happen to be two states that the University of Delaware happens to draw a lot of students from. So again, that idea that we sit in the middle has been brought up on several occasions. That is a reality. Although we are small in terms of participation numbers, we do sit near hotbeds as far as wrestling is concerned. And again, the idea as far as the growth of wrestling programs, women's wise, again, it is an Olympic sport. It continues to grow at the high school level, and it's continuing to grow at the college level. And I think Mike touched on that in his presentation back in September, October, talking about the growth of women's wrestling. So I think that's a sport that's not going away in terms of participation numbers. And again, a trend usually goes that you see it in high school, the interest builds up, why isn't there one at college? So again, when you go back to a Title IX argument, or when you talk about meeting the interest and needs, who's not to say in a few years female wrestlers are saying that, why isn't there a West wrestling program to meet our interest and needs at the university? Now, the growth of intercollegiate wrestling, an article I shared with you is it's in the back, one of the last articles there, is talking about the growth of wrestling that's occurring in Division III. Right now, in terms of colleges and universities, smaller colleges that usually tend to be Division III institutions are looking for male bodies to be on campus to increase their male populations. Wrestling is a very cost-efficient way of doing so by offering that sport. Those scholarships are involved in Division III. You're looking at basically a space, mats, and Mike talked about the potential for the grants being provided to provide the mats. And then if you talk in terms of the cost there, maybe a head coach that would have other responsibilities within the athletic department is a common model in Division III. It makes it very attractive, I think, for Division III institutions to have their programs. Now, a study that was shared with you, and I was just made aware rather recently, is the NCAA. The one thing I find interesting, especially at a school at our level, at the major, I shared numbers with you back talking about the Power 5 conferences. They have obligation, responsibility to make the money that pays for the programs. So that you've seen the trend in college athletics is dropping programs and focusing in on just your revenue-producing sports. And what the NCAA came out with this summer is talking about the idea that if you, important points that are actually highlighted in the article is talking about the NCAA reaffirming that it should be about conscious of the minimum requirements of sports sponsorship, but also talking in terms of opposing any alternative model where it's stepping away from supporting broad-based participation opportunities. You often hear, and when you see a Division I sport drop, they say club. That I think part of being a Division I institution is offering athletic competition at its highest level. And so the NCAA is recognizing the fact that yes, it's a minority of our schools that are in a revenue-producing environment, and that if they want to drop programs to focus in on those revenue-producing schools, maybe it makes sense. But the majority of schools aren't. And so it's an encouragement and a movement back towards a broad-based athletic department, meaning whether it be not dropping programs, but also, as you see in the case, that if it makes sense financially, strategically for an institution, moving back towards the participation-based opportunities. And again, I always think to myself that when you take a look at a university, you hear about, well, program loses money. Well, our women's field hockey team won a national championship, and if I'm a bean counter, I would say that our women's field hockey program is a money loser. But is that the point of college athletics? And again, the experiences that these young women had representing their university, having the opportunity to compete at the highest level, that's a part of being a Division I institution. And I thought it was an interesting statement being made by the NCAA of saying that moving away from that mindset that everybody's got to pay for itself. Now again, as a university, at the University of Delaware, we've made a commitment there in saying that, again, almost 80% of the revenues for our athletic department come from the university. And so, again, we've made a commitment to having athletics at that highest level. Other schools have tried to move away from it, but there's a movement within the NCAA to ensure that this broad base doesn't go away. Because when you have conversations with athletic directors, it is often about, based upon budget, what do I cut? And you hate to see opportunities being cut. All right. And then the other idea, and having a conversation last week with Sarah Wilhelmi, who's in charge of Director of College Partnerships, and her quote there, college wrestling is critical. And again, when you take a look at the number of athletes, not just wrestling, the number of athletes that competed in Rio that were either had competed in intercollegiate programs or currently are competing in intercollegiate programs is pretty astounding. And again, wrestling is a sport that has relied upon college as an important part of the developmental pipeline. When you take a look at some countries where higher education is free and that athletes are getting their education and then they can focus on their wrestling while it's being paid for, and again, taking away those opportunities impacts us athletically. And again, another point of the NCAA movement was recognizing the role that college athletics plays in Olympics, but also going back to the idea of excellence, the idea that potentially University of Delaware could produce an Olympic athlete in the future is something that should be considered. And then lastly, this was brought up that again, when you take a look at the other options in the state, Delaware State, which had wrestling and dropped it, and as I mentioned before, was budgetary as well as academic. They currently have 4 male sports and 10 female sports, and trying to come into compliance as far as Title IX is concerned. Wesley College, again, looking at where they are, a Division III school, and I think that would be having the conversation with their leadership if they would view wrestling as an opportunity to try to increase their male population because it is out of balance proportionality-wise. Goldie Beacon actually is pretty Title IX compliant, but the sense there is that they have a small student population and limited facilities, and maybe a challenge for them to initiate one. And then Wilmington College, they not proportional, but they have had women's programs to try to meet their Title IX requirements in the future. So, in a nutshell, what I just presented you were facts. You are open for interpretation as far as whether they be good or true, or good or bad, I should say. And again, I think it's going back, looking at that a request was being made of the university about bringing back the program, bringing that back as ramifications across multiple levels. And it's presenting those facts, and as far as that's what I think the university should be looking at in making that consideration of bringing back or reinstating the wrestling program. So I'm happy to take questions in regards to the facts and numbers that I've put forth.
Matt, I have a question. Since it's a shame that AD can't join us tonight, but can you tell me, has she seen the report?
No.
Okay, so she hasn't had time to review.
No.
Okay, so she's not a part of the conversation tonight.
No. I found out myself today.
Yeah, we should. But as a part of that, I know that there was an interest to follow up with Matt, and if you were interested to be a part of that conversation, that she gets to receive the presentation so that you can kind of listen and be a part of the questions. She sounded like she was open to that as well, but I think she wants to follow up with Matt to receive the presentation and kind of talk through the presentation.
Great.
If I ask a question about one of the very first slides of the last 10 years of the program, did you have an opportunity to talk to Coach Bill?
I did not.
That slide is a very difficult slide to look at because I know Coach Billy quite well. He was an employee of the university, as said, and also in the physical education department. And for these last 10 years, he basically was looking to get out of the program.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, this is why, and we were begging at the time for Coach Billy to be replaced, and not because he was a poor coach, because it wasn't full time. Some of his wrestlers are here, and they think very highly of him, and he had a good, successful record. But like any coach who has spent his time and is done and wants to be removed from the position, but it's not, obviously his interest waned. At the time, we had 2 programs in the state of Delaware through a period of 1985 to 1995 that were always nationally ranked and had a host of wrestlers. And I can tell you that he was never in either one of those rooms. And he wasn't out actively recruiting. This last 10 years, at the same time this was going on, there was the Foxcatcher program was in full bloom, and we had the best wrestlers in the world right 45 minutes up the road. There was so much help available. There was so many opportunities to hire a top-notch coach, and we have meetings and talked and asked, and so that final 10 years, I just think is just not indicative of what the last 10 years could have been and would have been had the university at the time just allowed Coach Billy to retire, which he wanted to do, and replace him. But that didn't happen. And I think if you show that slide to anybody, that they need to be aware of that situation, because it would have been totally different. And I just think that's important, as are other slides on here are important. It just looks like, a case is being made, and as has been said here, I mean, some of these can be rebutted very well in other presentations, like, for example, the annual giving that you're speaking about. 300 and some wrestlers identified, 192 give. That's over 50% of the wrestlers had contributed. Mm-hmm. Is that average, or what is the average of a sport? Can you tell us what that average is for other sports?
We'll find out.
It'd be interesting to see what percentage of the basketball players or percentage of the football players have given back over the years. But it kind of amazes me, really, because I'm thinking 50% might be fairly high. And then, after wrestling was dropped, of course, obviously it dropped to 60-something and then 18, whatever the figures were. But I do think that that's an important statistic, as is the GPA of the wrestling team at the time the sport was dropped. Because there's been several men's sports dropped here that have had very high GPAs in comparison to several of the other sporting teams that we still have. And I think as you looked at the EIWA and you see the institutions that are present in that league, and you said it'd be a good company to be involved in. I know a thing I always try to make my parents aware of. I happen to be in an institution where the parents all want their kids to go to Ivy League, and many of them don't like wrestling. But I try and tell them, well, you realize the one sport that the Ivy League is most successful at the Division I level is wrestling. Cornell having 33% of the national champions just several years ago, and Harvard and Princeton and they all have fine wrestling programs. But I mean, I do think that, in my experience, that wrestling attracts a higher GPA type student than does other sports, and also the type of student who would contribute to his university. Just I don't have any statistical data to back that up, other than just personal experience.
Yeah, just to follow up on Coach Holloway's question there. So do you think that we could find? I know we mentioned we looked at the APR number, but I had two questions. Could we look at what the grade point average was? I don't know if we can find that kind of information from back in the last years of the program. And I also, knowing how sports go, even as I look at some experiences here with the basketball team and football program, as we looked at the members. Let's look at the slide here. The other slide that Coach highlighted here, the last 10 years of the program, it mentions the team members, I assume at the onset of the season. Can we get a number on, and I don't know if they keep that kind of data, as to what the number might look like at the end of the season? Because I know wrestling and football and some of those interesting sports, I'd be curious to see if it remained at 21, average, it looks like 20 to 25 or 30 on one of these seasons, if it remained that high.
I would suggest that during that 10-year period of time, that number probably dropped considerably. But again, the reason I think can be directly attributed to the motivation of the coach.
But if you take the one thing with that, you take a look at the structure of the athletic department at that time. You had faculty members who had coaching responsibilities, so it was, and again, that model's really going away from college, but hey, that's part of your load.
Right.
And so that I'm sure was the challenge there.
So we're going to turn it over. Eric, go ahead.
First of all, not to focus on that, because that just really is kind of an indication maybe of why the program was dropped at that time. I do not think it's relevant to any conversation we have today, but I think Jack's statement is clear. Typically in a program, what you're doing then is looking to replace and bring in some fresh blood and build the program back up, which was not the interest of the university at that time, so it was convenient. What we're talking about today is bringing the program back, and I think when you have the programs that have dropped, I think the level of talent that's out there now wanting to wrestle, and you start offering scholarships, I don't think you have an issue at all with this successful program. However, their most successful program that they have here in 85, 86, they only had 22 wrestlers. So I don't know if the numbers, I don't know if we're talking about the right thing when we're talking about numbers. You're correct. What I'd like from you maybe for the next meeting might be, if you're capable, I know you're capable, if this is your role, to potentially maybe line up the negatives, the positives, and the neutral. Because I believe in here, it looks like you mentioned several reasons why they couldn't stay, right? And it's so much data that it's hard to kind of lift that out and put that over here. I mean, I'm looking over here at like, it says what to consider, and it looks like technically wrestling can meet all of those. The benchmarks for what the mission is, what the athletic mission is, what Title IX is. We can actually clear those hurdles. So that's not something that's an obstruction. The one that shocks me, obviously, is the 80% that you guys are subsidizing. I'm amazed at that, but that's your decision, obviously. So that's interesting. Obviously, that's a negative. But that's what I'm looking for. Like the peer institutions, it appears it draws a positive. That's a positive. So there's what I'm looking for. Not to go over every single one of these, but that's what I'm looking for. When you implement sports medicine, are you using that as a negative? Not in a bad way. I'm not saying you're trying to. You're just stating facts.
Yeah.
But are we indicating that would be one that would be in the one we've got to work on, that type of stuff? That's what I'm looking for the next meeting.
Yep.
So we have a more clear picture how to get out of this.
Because again, I deliberately wanted to just present facts and
Sure.
see either as positive or negative, and if that's what the recommendation is next time, then
It would be helpful.
Yeah.
So that I don't have to dissect it. I'm not living in your world. So I'm here because I want wrestling back. I recognize it's a bigger decision than that, so I respect that. And if the bar's too high to hurdle, I get it. The last thing I would like from you, maybe, if this is a respectful question, at the end of the day, we meet, I said this last night, we meet Title IX, we meet all those things. Where does it hit the fan? Who makes the final decision? where's the final decision end up? With the AD, with the board, with the?
Yeah, I believe this is an athletics department, as it was charged and developed, and Nicole, please share with me, but if there's something wrong, this was challenged for the university to take a look and study the feasibility of the sport of
To
wrestling at the
reinstate the
university.
program, though, if we
I would say
crossed all the
ultimately it
hurdles.
would have to be signed off by the board of trustees.
So the board of trustees would meet in their room wherever they are, and they would get a recommendation from mainly the athletic director
Yep.
based on this, okay.
Right, so basically what I heard you say is that, you know, it's outlined that there's a shared vision for the athletics department. So obviously that's already been created, but I also heard you say that a strategic plan hasn't been developed. So this working group couldn't have come at a better time. Because as the AD, the president, and everybody's putting together a strategic plan of what are the best, and as we're talking about the top 5 and you know, the chance for excellence, and also aligning with the university's strategic principles, the timing couldn't be perfect for us to actually sit around and have this conversation. But more importantly, just for confirmation, my understanding is that it goes to the board of trustees to actually make that final decision.
I would not hold me to that one, but
I didn't ask
my
you.
understanding on the, you know, again, the university has different, ladders you go through, or steps you go through for ultimate approval, but I would think it would probably be a board decision to bring reinstated sport.
Okay, and so can you make sure that that's confirmed for the next meeting?
Sure.
But also to that point, you were talking about it being roughly about $700 and some odd thousand dollars, $783,000, really to have a program, correct?
No, again, what I did with there is that I'd say, and Mike, you can chime in, but I think I paid our coaches well, and I gave full allotment of scholarships going back to the idea of excellence.
Sure.
And if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. So that's fully funded. And then as far as the operating budgets, I just went off of what I was looking at the IWAs, what their average was. It came in there.
Sure.
Could you tell us off the top of your head how many of the programs right now are currently fully funded?
I don't know that.
I mean, I would like to know.
I would say my guess would be like if your Big Tens.
No, I'm talking here at the university.
There are several, and again, I should not comment on behalf of the athletic department, but there's several that are fully funded. But I would rather not comment for the athletic
Is
department.
that information that we can have the next time to know which programs are fully funded and which aren't?
Sure. I can ask athletic for you.
And to that point, when you talk about subsidies, what does the state of Delaware give you as far as funding is concerned?
The funding, as far as I know, the funding goes to the university.
So we offset about $128.8 million, correct? Roughly,
In terms of,
funding to the school. I think it's about 11%. 11%.
Yeah, a little over 10.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's public knowledge, and it should be discussed in what taxpayers are giving back when we're talking about programs and we're talking about students coming in to University of Delaware that live in Delaware. One thing that I thought was unique, I thought was great, there was an article back in March 17th, 2016 from Forbes. As you're aligning the school with other University of Delaware with other programs, it was great to see that Penn State, they're funding their program at 1.8. North Carolina, which is number 2, is funding at $883,000, and Virginia Tech, which is number 3, is funding at $966,000. So to see your estimate of $783,000, I think is right on target.
and again, that's Cadillac. Bill Nye.
We're thinking.
I'll take a Cadillac.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, Cadillac's good.
Before we go, Paul, Representative Baumback, I know you were sitting patiently.
I've got a question and a request. Let me start with the request, and actually this touches on Coach Buxton's questions. This is wonderful. Thank you for this. Thank you for your verbal presentation. What I ask is if we can get this electronically as soon as possible, not like a week before the next meeting, but like this week would be wonderful. My eyesight sucks, and I think everyone behind me can't see a thing up there, so it'd be great to get it sooner. So, and then, along those lines, to the extent that any material that's going to be presented at a meeting if it can be sent out even 2 hours ahead of time, like the Board of Trustees does, or days ahead of time, like other folks do, that would be really wonderful if it could be done. Now to my content question. I think you mentioned on the diversity of the athletes, somewhere around 12% of maybe Hispanic and African American athletes is common. What is the current ballpark number of Hispanic and African American students at the University of Delaware and in the state?
At the athletic department or University of Delaware?
The overall University of Delaware.
That I don't know.
Okay.
But the number I took was, the percentage I took was of UV athletics, so it was like 20%. That's what I used for wrestling.
Right, okay, but
So the university, I think, is like 10%. I may be wrong on that too.
what I'm getting at, just policy-wise, is this program likely to increase the diversity of the student body of the University of Delaware if the University of Delaware reintroduces this?
Yeah. My understanding, again, I don't want to comment as, I know I sat in the seat of the athletic director, but I don't want to comment as for the university. That's not my function. But I do know that the athletic department is actually a higher diversity number than the university with that. So this would be, again, you're bringing.
So you would expect that reintroducing this would also help the university further broaden its
And, you know, the other thing I need to bring up too is, again, if you look at, you know, the idea of, I think we've had great success this past fall with our field hockey and our men's soccer team with a very international group of athletes. And wrestling has an international presence, and if you look at the top rankings of wrestlers, and again, I don't know what the structure is internationally, of potential of having international athletes from the United States, but it has potential being global as well.
And you had a slide about the vision, the goals, the strategy of the university. Increasing diversity of its student body is one of its stated mission and goals, isn't it? Is that not the case?
I think President Saunders, I think, said that at the inauguration.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
so Representative Baumbeck,
Yes.
I want to make sure I heard your question and that we all heard your question correctly. You're asking him to get the diversity numbers at the university because you believe that wrestling could potentially increase.
I guess what I'd like is on the topic of the pros, cons, and neutral. You know,
Okay, diversity.
is it reintroduction of this likely to enhance the diversity of the student body of the University of Delaware?
Okay.
Yes, no, or it'll be a wash.
I want to make sure I heard you.
Yep.
By NCAA statistics, wrestling ranks in the top 5 of both African American and Hispanic participation. And if you combine indoor, outdoor, track, and cross country, we even move up and improve on that. But wrestling does score well in that department. Wrestling also has the largest percentage of first-generation college-bound students across all 3 NCAA divisions. I know a lot of college presidents really pride themselves on attracting first-generation college students.
If I could just go back to Mr. Buxton's earlier, I really like his idea of the positive and the negative and the neutral, whatever, but I don't know where this fits in here, but I do know back in 1991, we had discussions with Edgar Johnson at the time. One of the things we sort of predicted, and we've had, I mean, also at Westchester University, the same thing, was that if the university were to drop the program, which they did, and if Westchester were to drop the program, we knew that we would have a real dearth of prospective coaches to choose from. Because at the time, a host of our high school coaches were graduates of the University of Delaware wrestling program and the Westchester University's wrestling program. And since, in the 20 years that have followed, I can tell you as an athletic director, it is very, very difficult to find a collegiately experienced high school applicant. And I would list that as a strong positive, because I do believe, and take wrestling aside, take athletics aside, that a university has a responsibility to educate its populace and provide us with our elementary teachers and our secondary teachers. And so I add to that, I think it's, as an athletic director, I think it's kind of a responsibility to help us train our future coaches, which is where that happens. And so I would view that as a reinstatement were to occur, that would be a very strong positive to the community, a source of coaches, trained coaches who have wrestled collegiately.
I have one here. One of the biggest pros we would have here is the community that's backing our University of Delaware team, and the number one recruiting pool in the nation for wrestling. I'd say most of the All-Americans in Penn State who just won NCAA championships were down on that floor not long ago. So if we can find a way to keep these kids here from the East to the East and put them in our program, we could be a championship team in a very short time. That has got to be one of the number one pros, I would think, for this program.
So Vic, to that point, I did not see anything in the presentation related to there's an impact study for the East to the East. That's happening next weekend, the weekend before Christmas, and we know that there was information shared with the state through grant and aid for the impact that it was to the hotels, the restaurants, the business industry in the state of Delaware. So where is that information?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, so we're gonna collect that.
But it's been happening for the last, how many years?
It's $1 million.
Last 23 years. So there has to be something in history that could have been used, right? Can we just,
Well, I was gonna plug it.
okay, perfect. Perfect. Art, go ahead.
And I guess along the same lines, Senator Course, I'm a bean counter, so could you put into perspective, you mentioned the $780,000 cost, but you also had a slide on attendance and revenue from donations. Can you give us a net number as to what the program would cost when you factor in that ticket sales, annual contributions to the program? It may not be that high.
Well, if you're talking about ticket sales, again, it would be, again, you look at University of Delaware now, ticket sales, there's no program paying for itself. Again, that's where you go back to institutional support. But no, I didn't run those numbers, but if I could run out, seriously run out a 7-game home match and say what the projected revenues would be, but I would say it would be minor. Again, if you put, what's that?
It would be an offset to the expense.
Yeah, but not significant, I would say.
What's very unique about this situation, though, because we've been involved in a lot of these situations across the country, is an organization like the Delaware Wrestling Alliance and the corporate support that this school has right here in its backyard is extraordinary, combined with the Beast of the East and what that brings. Combined with the organization level of wrestling right now, these wrestlers and business chapters that are up around the country, combined with some prominent alumni that are very connected with this program. Admittedly, there is so much more going for this program than we usually have when we go through these exercises of trying to bring back other divisional programs. And so it's just that Beast of the East, and to have 107 of the top high school programs on campus here every year, it's just very unusual. Most Division I schools, any Olympic sport would be thrilled to have opportunities like that. And then the support from the state legislature, I'll forget that, is an unbelievable recipe for extraordinary success. And just lastly, when you look at in our sport, some of our top teams like Cornell are like top 5 programs. High academic schools that participate at the highest level year in and year out. So there's so many case studies to look at that we have plenty of examples of relatively low funded programs that have finished in the top 5 in the country. So we might be a little biased, but it has an awful lot going for it here.
Bernice, I think you have a question.
Yeah, so I just have this question. When I was looking at this and sort of to piggyback off of Art, when you're looking at some of these numbers, I'm having a hard time comparing them to the other programs at the university. So, for example, you had brought up about percent giving versus the others, and then the offset of the revenue to the cost versus the other programs. Those are things that I think are missing in my mind as I look at this, and I think would be really helpful.
So you're interested in seeing the budgets for the,
Just that, I want to see the percentage, yeah. So if the cost of another program is offset by ticket revenue, what's the percentage offset there compared to maybe what we're projecting wrestling?
just say thank you very much, honestly, for preparing this. I know it was a lot of information to take in, and I think that we've come a long way from where we started, right? I mean, this has been several conversations, but to now have it open and continue this conversation, I think, anybody at this table, are there any other questions related to the study? Any feedback related to the study?
Can you actually remind concretely what our group's steps are and the timetable that you have in mind for those steps?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
So, I think in the way we designed this, or the thought process, University of Delaware actually holds the ball on this as far as providing the information. Matt has accomplished that task. This working committee was to then give more feedback to what would be helpful in making the decision. I mean, certainly, if a strategic plan is going to be developed, then having all of this information versus not having it, this would not have been a conversation in the strategic plan. So at least we're heading in the right direction to creating, hopefully, a D1 wrestling program. That being said, I think that based on the questions that have come out tonight, there should be a follow-up meeting with the answers being provided to the questions, which is why at this point, if there's any more feedback or any questions, it should be addressed right now. But by February 1st, Representative Bobak, there needs to be a report developed. And if not that at that time, then we need to ask for an extension for that report to be completed, to be submitted back to the General Assembly.
Thank you, community, for coming out tonight too. All you here tonight, you heard a lot about what we're trying to do here, and you were part of this whole process just by being here tonight. And your feedback is also encouraged to me or anyone else on this board. Any questions you may have that we can bring up next meeting. So you are a big part of what's happening here, and you're the reason we are here, the rest of the community in Delaware. And I thank you for that.
Senator,
Yes.
6 o'clock, 6:30 next time, maybe top 30 is there.
It's tough for downstate.
So we will absolutely put that into the suggestions, and appreciate that, yes.
Now, can I just have a clarification on something real quick?
I'm sorry, say that again,
Just a
ma'am?
clarification.
Yes.
So for the next meeting, I have a list of action items here that I'm gonna research. But then at that point, that's a conversation, and off of that meeting, a final report will be prepared that will have the input of this committee.
Yep.
Okay. And so then basically a report will be written up summarizing the thoughts that come out of the final committee.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good. Thank you all for coming. Thank the committee for again your contribution to this discussion. You've been able to capture some information and notes, and we'll certainly take them back, and we'll look forward to scheduling another meeting. It sounds like in the mid or latter part of January when we get back together.
Maybe earlier, so we've got a chance between that meeting to finalize and agree upon the final meeting. So maybe like first week or so in January, so we can have the final one done by the end of January, by
Sure.
February 1st.
So are we talking 2 more meetings, or are we talking another meeting?
I think two. One's going to present the answers, and then there's going to be the drafting of a report that presumably we're going to present and all approve, or how's the report being, is there an approval process for the report?
It's actually whatever University of Delaware is delivering.
So you're submitting, so
Yeah.
this.
So it's not, the working group is not producing a report?
No, University of Delaware is.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
That's okay. Ricky, if you can just make, or I can make the general announcement for anybody in the general public. If there were questions that, that you'd like to submit, please submit them, so that way it can be addressed, through Dr. Robinson, so we can add it to the report.
I think I asked the same question that Christine was asking, and I sent you an email, never got an email back. I mean, I think that's an important question, comparing what the operating cost is for, the other, athletic,
So what I would recommend is if there is a question or comment, maybe if you have members of the committee that we have contact with, maybe we can directly connect it to them, and you could submit that question. I think that might be easier to do, so that Dr. Robinson he's getting it from a member of the committee, if that makes sense.
Sure.
that.
Hey, Dr. Robinson, if you can just make sure that we all get a report ahead of time, so that way it can be shared.
And, all right, cool, can we talk after, I mean, what format do you want that report being? Is it a written document, or is it what are you actually looking for in that report?
Just the follow-up question, answers to the questions that were presented tonight, along with the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, and with anything that comes in.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So with that, I guess we can adjourn.
Yep.
All
Excellent,
right.
thank you very much.
Thank you.